Can I make one suggestion, Adam?
Yes, Stephen.
I don't think post-COVID is necessarily the right framework to think about this in, because I don't think we're going to be post-COVID for probably 18 months and 2 to 2 years until a vaccine's been developed and is rolled out. We're really moving into a near zero COVID period of containment where and post-COVID again will be different again, but the next year or so is going to be living with COVID, but being more mobile.
Yeah, look, I think that's a good point in terms of how we think about sort of time here for a moment. For the purposes of this activity, and I can see that people have started already, so I'll get you to just pause for a moment. I know you're all keen, but I think for the purposes of this, let me use that idea of post-COVID as a long tail from today onwards, if that makes sense. And we can certainly, through any of our work, dig deeper on milestones or other relevant kind of concepts of time, depending on sort of what the specific issues might be. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to work through 3 questions, which I've structured up here. We work from left to right. We tackle one at a time. The first one is sort of, what have we observed? You know, what are the changes in mobility that we've observed? You know, since kind of this started happening, you know, February-ish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give us an amount of time for sort of each of these, and we're going to have a conversation after each of them. So what I'm going to do is, given time, I'm going to get us to just sort of jump straight in, and you should be seeing what I see. So if you bring up on your screen, you click that link I sent you, we'll get stuck into that first question. I'm going to put
sorry, Adam, yes. Are you talking about during what period? Just during the pandemic sort of closed down period? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, this has kind of been like a March. I mean, we're almost the end of April, aren't we? It's really been the last 8 weeks, I would sort of roughly put this on, when things started to clamp down. What changes in mobility have you been observing? Have you observed? So I'm going to give us a few minutes. I'll put a little timer on here. So I'll give us 3 minutes to go through this. And then we'll circle back and have a conversation about it. We'll do some voting as well. The idea, as we eventually move from left to right on this board, we get to that third column, and the focus will be then on sort of potentially three priorities there. But if you just want to tap away, is anyone unable to access the link I sent through? Is everyone working through the board okay? No problems there? Just let me know.
Yeah, the board works well, Adam.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to amend this sort of question up here. Okay, about 1.5 minutes to go. We're about halfway through. For those that have kind of exhausted their observations, you've got yourself 3 votes. Okay, you can see there on the board there's a little little thumbs up icon. If you click on those, that means that you've placed a vote on a particular issue. I'll get you to sort of avoid voting on yours. Let's sort of, you know, get some diversity there. So 3 votes for each of the columns in the board. So try to avoid going over your 3 votes. It just leaves you with less when we get to the end. Okay, 10 seconds to go, and then we'll pause and we'll have a conversation. 5, 4, and 3, and 2. Okay, let's pause and stop and have a conversation about this. I'll get you to cast your votes if you can. So I'm just going to do some moving of the sort of tiles for a moment. We've certainly got a couple that are floating to the top there. Increased recreational activity on walking and bike paths. I would not disagree with that whatsoever. Less pollution, less usage of public transport. Yep. Greater diversity in the number of people riding and biking. Okay, has everyone cast their votes? Let me just move these further up to the top so we can make some sense of them. Okay, as I'm shuffling these around, who'd like to share some observations or comments based on what you see? Is there anything that surprises you in here when you glance down these comments and issues, observations? Nothing really of surprise, really, is there? A big drop in motorised big thingies and a massive increase in people on all different types of mobility devices like bikes and skateboards and things like that.
Yeah, mostly just logical artifacts of the lockdown arrangements.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we've certainly been looking at some of the safety data that's coming out. Like there's been obviously a big drop in motor vehicles, but the pedestrian and bike fatalities in urban areas is the same as it was 12 months ago. In other words, the proportion of people being injured or seriously injured or killed has actually gone up.
Has gone up.
Yeah. In regional areas, it's gone down a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But in urban areas, the fatalities of and serious injuries of pedestrian and bike riders has significantly increased as a proportion of traffic. So
yeah.
Tony can back that one up.
I've seen some cities overseas release data that it's been an increase in the proportion of speeding vehicles because there's less traffic. And some cities have been reducing speed limits to improve road safety and reduce the demand for intensive care beds from car accidents or car-related accidents.
Yeah, okay.
One of the big factors, I think, is the missing support for vulnerable people that are vulnerable in our society. So to be able to stay mobile, get to the critical central needs that they need, they can't get around. And I think that's been, a big gap in mobility.
Have we got that here? Okay, we've got difficulty for elderly transport. Yeah. Any comments or observations here that I have missed around rideshare? Did anyone bring that up, or is there any particular observations there?
Ride hailing is down significantly.
And also bike share is down in the cities that I've looked at, and a lot of cities have started to remove bicycles from the shared bikes from their network. So Jump, which is the Uber-run bike share service in Melbourne, has put all their bikes in warehouses during this period, so it's gone to zero.
Is that an issue with transferring of the virus, and that's why the scooters have been pulled as well?
I haven't spoken to any of the operators, but I would assume that it's got to do with that, and also maybe just lower demand. So you've got a combination of potentially lower demand and then the risk infection of not actually being able to sanitize the bikes between riders. So yeah, I think that's probably a cross-infection issue.
Yeah, the operators have all shut down in Australia, apart from Unilever and a few out in Brisbane, and likewise in New Zealand. And their operating costs have gone up 40% due to the additional hygiene issues they were having to address. The demand had dropped by, I think, 60 to 70%. So it was basically uneconomic. And then New Zealand in the last week apparently are looking at declaring them as a dangerous mode of transport due to hygiene issues, which we think is quite crazy, given people touch lift buttons and ATM buttons, FPOS buttons, handrails, escalator things. You know, it's drawing a line on scooters, as showing the paranoia about scooters rather than really looking at it from an overall health perspective.
Yeah, okay. Can I ask the question here? The second highest one we got on votes was less pollution. Can I get us to just quickly, before we move on, just be a little bit more granular there? Air, noise, both, or other?
I think air's the obvious one, because it's a lot clearer. But we were walking around Manly this morning and commenting how much quieter it would be if you were a resident of Manly.
Yeah.
It would be so quiet compared to the normal hustle and bustle you have, particularly at night.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's noise and air.
And both. Okay. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
One of the things that I noticed in the things that we've noted here is we're mainly just talking about general sort of not area-specific increases and decreases. One of the things I think has been a bit of a feature of the changes in transport has been that, you know, it's much less city-focused and it's more neighbourhood-focused. So, you know, your local streets are just thronging with people, but then you go into the city and it's just dead. So maybe that's something to consider as well.
Yeah.
I think part of that is an artifact of the work from home phenomenon as well. And so people are just doing things more in their local neighbourhood. They're working from home, but they're also going for walks around. My office is in my front room of the house, so I can see lots of people on the street, as I'm sure many of you can as well. And there's just so much more foot traffic on local streets than there was before.
And a lot of that's going to stick. I had a conversation with the CFO of a top 20 ASX company over the weekend, and they were saying that what this is proving is that people can work effectively from home and don't need to travel as much. And they are looking forward to allowing a lot more people to work from home on a much more regular basis post this, and travel to be down. And I think a lot of the big companies will see that. So we're going to end up with, rather than necessarily one big city, we're going to end up a city of villages.
I think that's a really good point, Stephen. I've spoken to some people as well that also run large companies, and they're saying that their managers never really felt comfortable with people working from home before, a lot of their managers, and now those managers are seeing that their workers can still get what needs to be done from home, and the people that are working from home are noticing that they can work effectively from home. And it might not be that they work 100% of the time from home. In fact, a few people will, but a lot of people will move to 1 day a week, and 1 day a week is still a 20% reduction in vehicle kilometres travelled. So I think that's one of the biggest things from this whole episode has been proving that working from home does work. And toll road operators, I think, are going to see a huge reduction in their revenue in the future, because we are going to see maybe a 15, maybe 10 or 15% reduction in traffic, even after a vaccine has been discovered, if it is indeed discovered in the future, because people have realised, oh, okay, the technology is there now to facilitate effective working from home.
You know, I think the other thing it's going to do is that it's going to free up some office space in CBDs that could be repurposed as residential. And generally what you're going to see is more people living and working close together. So the proportion of short journeys is going to increase quite significantly, which is going to change the mode mix.
Yep.
I think this is an interesting one, right? I sat on a property council session a couple of weeks ago, and the big office owners essentially say that there won't be a difference. We all think that we'll all work from home now that we've done it, but they're not anticipating really much change there. You're going to get a whole heap of people that also are going mad at home, you know, with toddlers around their ankles as well. So it's quite interesting. They believe it's kind of even out. I think what's interesting, and this is why this is fascinating right now, the situation that we're in more broadly, is everyone's now a post-COVID-19 futurist, right? We've all got the ideas flowing, the thoughts coming. And it's interesting to kind of really see how much of it is critically sort of interrogated versus, you know, it's what we've just always wanted. You know, we've always wanted cars off streets, right? More people walking and bicycling. So that's what we think, you know, the world will be now. And that work from home one is a really interesting one. You know, we've got one of our members, a massive international consulting firm. They've pretty much got everyone working from home now. They've done a pretty good job at it. There's been a 3% reduction in productivity. Okay. So, you know, being who I am at the Smart Cities Council, show me the data, and then we can sort of start really having a conversation as to whether we think people will do X, Y, or Z. I think we're in a really interesting transition phase where we all want to be futurists. We all want to think about and aspire to what we want the other end to look like. But it is quite challenging because there's some big holes when it comes to the data. So it's going to be very interesting to see how decision makers critically lay those things out on the table to make decisions. Because if I was running a company and I was spending a ton of money in the CBD, you know, having people come in every day, you know, if good data was available, you'd make some decisions. But it seems like it's still just a little bit early, yet all the crystal ball gazing has kind of started already. Anyway, I'm not here to really share my views. It's more what the group thinks. So with that, what I'd like to do is go to our second column here. What I'm trying to do here, what might help in stimulating the economic recovery. So what I'm trying to do here is get us to think about mobility and economic recovery, okay? Because that's kind of like the key issue that we're thinking about. What is the role of mobility in this economic recovery that we're going to have to sort of go through? I don't know if we're going to be able to answer that question. I'd like us to give it a go. I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes. You know how this goes. I'll count us down as we get through it. From a mobility perspective, what might help in stimulating economic recovery? What is the role of mobility in stimulating economic recovery? Well, you haven't struggled to come up with some ideas here, folks, which is great. We're about halfway through, so a minute and a half to go. While you're doing that, I'm actually going to add another new column in here. I think there's a question missing, and we'll do that after this one. Okay, 30 seconds to go. How might mobility help us in stimulating an economic recovery? For those that are getting close to exhausting their sort of responses here, you've got 3. You should have, if you didn't over vote on the first column, you should have another 3 votes on this column. I'll get you to cast your votes as well, and we'll see what happens.
Adam, I don't think I can vote. Does that mean I have to unvote on the other ones?
Did you use all 9 votes on the last column?
No.
Oh.
1, 2, 3 votes.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, I haven't activated all 9. I only gave you 3. That's my error. Okay, let me. Okay, you all should have 9 votes in your back pocket now. Actually, no, I'm going to have to give you another 3 because I've added another board here. Okay, bear with me. Okay, you should now have plenty of votes. So cast away. While I'm doing some rearranging and you're voting, any observations around freight and couriers and that part of the ecosystem? Has anyone seen, read, or heard anything interesting on that front?
Anecdotally, in the inner west, we're getting feedback that there is a lot more courier activity, particularly just small white vans.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having people saying to us, are we going to start providing hubs for people to work out of because we've got so much clutter on the perimeter?
Interesting. I understand Uber launched what's it called? Uber Connect or Uber something this week in Brisbane, where they can become courier drivers after a successful trial in Sydney. Has anyone used that service yet?
I saw it advertised, haven't used it.
Okay.
What was it called again?
Is it Uber Connect? So Uber drivers can essentially be a courier. So I was talking to an Uber driver the other day. You pull up at a person's house, just like you'd come to pick them up for a lift. They walk out, they put the parcel in either the boot or the back seat, maximum 20 kilograms. And just like a normal Uber trip, you just take a parcel to a predetermined location, drop it off. I haven't heard anything yet. It's day 1 today for Brisbane, but apparently it's been going in Sydney for a bit.
I mean, that seems like a very good idea in terms of a just-in-time delivery solution, but it's not very efficient unless it can do something like an Uber pool, where it can pull parcels together so that it's not one trip taking one parcel across the city, but rather it's being able to collect 5 or 6 parcels and taking them from one postcode to another part of the city that all share a similar geographic location, just like a normal courier service would do. Otherwise, you're getting a lot of vehicle kilometres travelled for not much outcome.
Yes. I do not disagree.
I mean,
with that.
at least Uber's already got that. The pool technology, the Uber
right.
pool technology, not necessarily the logistics side, though.
I think there will be probably what I was anticipating was a bit of a step change in people ordering stuff online because, and therefore, yeah, the downside of that is this extra, trips for single parcel stuff. And so if there was something, not quite sure how I can put this in, but like that sort of consolidation and coordinated freight and logistics of, the...
Actually, something we might not have put in that first column, Adam, is just around, certainly in New South Wales, they've now approved dark kitchens. So where you might not necessarily have a shop front for a restaurant, but that's certainly been something we've seen a shift into, is kind of much more of that delivery of food and all sorts of stuff. I reckon even some of the, we've seen a lot of removal vans around, but I don't think that they're doing home removals. I think they're just doing Airtasker. I've bought a desk on Gumtree and I need someone to bring it to my house, sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at Newmarket Village here, North Brisbane, last week. I sent a photo. I went over and got some lunch. And, this is sort of like it's not like a neighbourhood village. It's a little bit bigger. It's on sort of a main road. Coles, pharmacy, 3 hairdressers, it's got a small cinema. And I took a photo and I counted 24 food delivery bikes, not the electric mopeds or motorbikes, just like bicycles, 24, all just sitting waiting. And I sent it to a friend and they said, yeah, it's booming at the moment. The question is it going to stay that way? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens when the restrictions get relaxed. Okay, so we've done the voting here. It looks like there's some pretty clear ones that have bounced up to the top here. Micro logistics seems to be a key one. Rapid rollout, Cycleways. Look, can I just challenge you all on this one? I don't. Talk me through, and this is because it was, the second highest voted on. How does this stimulate economic recovery?
I can answer this one to some extent, Adam, mainly because if your jobs are mostly in CBD locations and that's where people would normally be commuting by public transport. If there's a fear of hopping onto public transport, then there's having cycleways lets people get there without driving or catching an Uber or whatever. In terms of footpath widths, I guess if you go into the CBD on any standard day, there's a lot of footpath crowding, and there may just be reluctance for people to return to very high levels of footpath crowding. And so putting in temporary widened footpaths allows people to still return to the city and not necessarily have as much contact as they might have normally.
Also, in terms of construction jobs, $1 million invested in bicycle or walking infrastructure creates roughly the same amount of jobs as $1 million dedicated to, say, an urban freeway or an urban rail project. In fact, some people say it creates more jobs because those projects are usually less mechanized and have more design components to the project than one of the big mega projects. So for sectors of the economy that are going to experience a downturn, such as construction, as the property market starts to experience a fairly significant predicted downturn, then the transfer of those skills into building things like protected bike lanes, for instance, offers the opportunity to stimulate the economy in areas that are likely to get hardest hit from this COVID downturn.
Okay, no, that's good.
One other thing on that, Adam. So I think if micro logistics is going to be an important thing, you need to have the better lanes for them to use along with bikes and the other vehicles, because it makes it easier for delivery. It doesn't block roads, and it just makes that a far more efficient process.
Okay.
And also, Adam, because it's localized, so you might get your big road projects, but they're very, in one place or another, like the southeast motorway or whatever they've fast tracked. But that doesn't give you local jobs, whereas the cycleways do give you the local jobs, and they also opportunities for councils to take on people in the workforce who might not otherwise be getting back into work sooner.
Yeah.
So if you think of it in terms of what the local economy needs, I think they are really useful.
Yeah.
Than the single big project somewhere or other.
Yeah, sure.
Research in the US about that, and how many jobs were created per dollar spent, and out of these sorts of projects, and things like tracks and bike paths and these sort of things were quite high because of those reasons, because it is much more labour intensive, less capital intensive. You've got less massive machinery, and it's more localised, like you're saying.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I'm just still critically trying to understand. Of these things, are these things that we've just always wanted and we should always do, right? Of course we should do more bike lanes, yes. And I'm trying to pick through these to see what are deliberate COVID-specific economic recovery opportunities. And of course, we're not going to answer that today, but you can see how my mind is thinking, and how we might be able to sort of differentiate. Right.
Well, I think another good framework around that is if you look at what the most rapid accelerators of COVID have been, two of them have been congested public transport, and the other one has been areas of high pollution. Cities with high air pollution have had higher transmission and contagious rates of COVID. So they're things we want to avoid, and we've seen Milan is going to reduce its public transport capacity by about 2/3 to give social distancing. Airlines and other modes are doing that already. And if that happens, we don't want people going back to private driver-only cars, because that's going to drive pollution levels up. So you don't want more driver-only cars. You've got to accept that public transit usage is going to be down. And really that leaves you with the forms of transport we've been focusing on so far, which is micromobility, bicycles, and having better infrastructure to make that feel safer and more accessible, so that we don't go either to public transport or to cars, which make COVID transmission worse.
Yeah.
And apart from the job creation potential of these projects, I think another important point is that for many governments, the issue hasn't been, a bike lane's good or a bike lane's bad. Most local governments and state governments are, well, yeah, bike lanes are good, but the congestion concerns and the use of curbside space for car parking and the demand for that has been so high that it's held back the rollout of better bicycle infrastructure. But now that we don't have that congestion, and we're not likely to see that return for the next couple of years, then this is a good opportunity, especially for rolling out what most people would consider to be temporary bike infrastructure that you can roll out 1 kilometre or so overnight, possibly more depending upon your work crew. And you can, just as importantly, you can pull it up really quickly as well. So you can say, we'll roll it out, we can roll this out in 2 weeks, and it will be taken back up and put into a warehouse in 2 weeks if conditions change and it's decided that actually the street that it looked like before is a better way of doing it, and we don't want the bike lanes anymore, so we can get rid of them. So don't lay concrete, don't lay bluestone, do it in really light temporary infrastructure, and you can pull it up when you want to in the future.
Yeah, okay.
Adam, I think for me, there's two ways of looking at this, right? One is kind of trying to bank the savings we've made with this process, and that is actually trying to keep as many people as possible working at home, because the huge congestion benefits, the pollution gains have been because we haven't been traveling. So one piece of this puzzle is, what are the things that we can support that keep people working at home? And then the second piece is economic recovery comes from jobs or new industries. So what's the urban mobility tactic or strategy that gets us more new jobs, or gets us, you know, people in the airline industry or tourism industry who are now looking for jobs? What's the urban mobility strategy that employs them more or creates a new industry? Those are sort of the two pieces, I think, to the economic recovery. It's both the upside job creation as well as banking those savings. I think those two elements to think about, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Folks, 10 minutes to go, and we've still got 2 columns. So here's our next challenge. You have 1 minute. You've got 60 seconds to answer this next question, which is, what do you fear? Not just generally, like spiders and, you know, things like that. In terms of, from a mobility perspective, over the coming 6 to 10 months, right? What do you fear? What do you fear? 60 seconds. I think there's some pretty clear, 30 seconds to go. There's some pretty clear.
I've started typing a few things and then seen someone put them just before me. So
me too. I merged two that were the same.
Yeah,
okay, Adam.
that's and I think in summary, a lot of what's going up there now is the fear of going back to what it was.
Yeah.
You know, what is interesting though, and given that we're recording this, I'll just verbally say it, is that there's a you know, the nerds in this space are saying that the transition is going to be potentially the worst, right? So not just those that used to drive will just go back to driving. There's this transition period where the office blocks will open up in the CBD. You know, private sector, we're going to start filling them again because we still don't have a treatment for this thing. Everyone will drive, even the old public transport, you know, hardcore people like me, bus every morning, that everyone's going to jump in a car so they can be in their own safe bubble. So there's sort of like an interesting transition concept around this, you know, going back to sort of car dominance, that there's actually going to be like an extreme explosion of this before it gets back to the normal, which is quite an interesting one. Okay, 60 seconds is done. We've got 8 minutes to go. I'll be circulating this, we'll be sharing it. Let's jump straight to the last column, folks. 3 mobility priorities for the recovery. We're going to get this down to 3. Now, we're going to have to vote on these, okay? So I'm going to set the timer. You've got 3 minutes. That's going to then give us 5 minutes to discuss. Okay, 3 minutes underway. You can put as many up there as you want, but what we're going to be doing is identifying the top 3. While you're sort of bashing away there on the keyboard, getting those in, let me just sort of annoy you in the background here. So small business is the engine of our economy, small business. And kind of when you get out of the CBDs, you get into the neighborhoods and suburbs, you've got small traders and coffee shops and, you know, all those folks that are really hurting right now. I live in a suburb north of Brisbane, you know, kind of local shops down the road. Certainly many of these observations, more people walking, cycling, rada. But then equally sort of shops that are dead. What I ask myself is, how does mobility, can we achieve both a continued increase in walking, cycling, rollerblading, skateboarding, as well as stimulating small business in the suburbs? So they're the kind of real granular ideas that come into my mind. Yes, public transport and rolling out kilometers of cycle lanes and getting into the city, but there's been such a change, I think, in the suburban landscape. It's been very, very fascinating. So for me, I ask myself, how does mobility help in the economic recovery of those suburbs and neighbourhoods? I'm not asking you to answer that question, but just sharing what's going on in the background in my head.
Interesting that you've focused particularly on stimulating the economic recovery, because in a sense, I mean, one of the key things I think works well is to make local streets for local people a bit more, you know, and reducing rat runs and really working on the filtered permeability of local neighbourhoods. I think we're talking a lot about, say, rolling out bike lanes, but actually I think a lot of what we might want can actually be achieved just by removing through traffic from a bunch of local neighbourhoods. Now, that may not necessarily stimulate economic recovery. It doesn't mean laying a bunch of concrete or employing a lot of people, but it is something that will allow people to sort of use their local neighbourhoods better and probably cater to the demand that will be there as people, you know, work from home more and do more local trips. It may not fit into the bucket the way it's framed at the moment, though. It doesn't necessarily stimulate economic recovery, but I think it facilitates the new normal, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Tony. Okay, we're at time on that question. Cast your votes, friends. Let's see what percolates up to the top. There's certainly some clear ones that are getting a good level of support. Many smaller projects focused on local sustainable mobility. Reallocate road space, reallocate that. Wider footpaths, more of those lanes. Reduce these limits. I'm going to be tough, maybe brutal, and say, okay, so just more of what we've always wanted.
That's what it looks like.
Is that a harsh response? Is that it? More of what we've always wanted.
But we've always known what was good for the rest of the world. It was just getting the other people on board with us.
We just had to engineer a virus to make other people realise it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it came from the transport people, didn't it, this virus?
I think also, though, what's changed, Adam, is certainly what I'm noticing is a greater push to change that business as usual more rapidly. And so, you know, if you think about the transport agencies and councils who deliver all of this, plan and deliver all of this, there's been a great reluctance to change what's been, you know, working for the past 50 years or longer. I think what's happening with COVID is a much, much greater push from the community and advocacy groups, which is filtering through quite rapidly to senior levels of organisations to change that business as usual. And I think that's the part that's changed more than what the actual ask is at the end of the day.
Okay.
And the thing about the top one, when it's smaller projects, I mean, that's got the potential, if we do it right and if we scale it up, to both deal with the jobs demand as well as banking the gains, right? If that was done statewide, if there was, you know, an aggregate kind of level of endorsement for that.
Yeah, at one level, they're smaller projects, but on the other hand, a problem with cycling and bike lanes generally has been they've been regarded as small projects and not infrastructure. We need to get infrastructure dollars thrown at these sort of solutions so it happens in scale and is coordinated and isn't the hodgepodge of disconnected bike lanes we have now.
Just in continuation of that, I think joining the dots on different things is the key issue here. So it's a case of shovel readiness is about how quickly that we can get this investment to mobilise into jobs. It's about enabling the local economic recovery of small businesses in neighbourhoods, so connecting them through better delivery solutions, if you like. So businesses that are not specialising in logistics, how quickly can they start to exploit this step change in attitude, and being able to also connect the dots with just the change in support and perspective in the broader community. I think there'll be a lot more sympathy for investment in things that can be about supporting local jobs, you know, let's say leaning into what people now realise that is viable, working from home, you're having local businesses, local restaurants deliver food to them, things like that. So So it feels like maybe it's joining the dots and not necessarily reinventing the wheel, because I mean, you've rightly pointed out these are existing ideas, but it's more sort of drawing a circle around existing thinking and reshaping it into this COVID, post-COVID era.
Yeah, okay. No, absolutely. Good point. Good point.
At a broader level as well, I think what this has shown us is that, we've talked a lot about flattening the curve in terms of infection rate, and it's really highlighted how government policies, when you implement them, are actually effective at achieving the things that you want to achieve. And so you can transfer this flattening of the curve to flattening the transport emissions or transport BKT curve as well. And I think it's probably stimulated government to realise actually there is a strong role that government can play in reducing emissions and making our cities better through effective policies, but you just need to implement them. And hopefully that will carry on in terms of the level of confidence that government have to achieve the outcomes that they've had as visions or as strategic objectives, but have failed to follow through with implementation.
We've been calling it flattening the curve.
Okay, folks, thanks, Christian. I know you have to go. We're at the hour, everyone. So I'm just going to I'm going to bring a close. I'll just stop recording now.